that way of thinking, that combined is and as. Graham Cairn Smith had some wonderful examples of evolution and how evolution is constantly thinking, we've invented this, like we've invented bone as a structural material, but maybe it could also be used to transmit sound in the mammalian ear. Or we have feathers for insulation, but maybe they'd work for flight. And so evolution is constantly playing with as, right? A Go player would immediately say that it's not this particular agent on the Go board, but the overall pattern that is going to determine the outcome of the game. And so this is a model that looks at how blurriness resolves itself into focus. We're coming upon a big Darwin year, 2009, the 150th anniversary of publication of Origin of Species, the 200th anniversary of Darwin's birth, and actually also the 200th anniversary of the publication of Lamarck's great work, Philosophy of Zoology, in 1809. And I think that Lamarck may be due for a resurrection. He was one of those unfortunate characters who suffered real political consequences because, in fact, the transmission of acquired characteristics wasn't even his idea, and Lamarckism, as many have said, has very little to do with Lamarck. He probably was the originator of the idea of coevolution and did a lot of very serious work on the role of behavior in evolution. And while he wasn't right about everything, given that he thought his thoughts 200 years ago, he was amazingly prescient, as Darwin himself acknowledged. So evolution is a highly debated topic, and the model that we adopt will affect our approach to environmental sustainability. And our definition of evolution constrains how we explain the origin of life and design toward our futures. So I think the challenge is we're facing a number of environmental fade-outs is to think in this way about how small systems network to become larger systems, much as the origin of life dynamics suggests. And I want to suggest in this complementarity, the right brain, left brain complementarity, this is a vastly oversimplified chart just to keep it clean. But on the left side is the left brain rational view that is commonly accepted. But what both intelligent design and the Darwinian evolutionists have in common is that in both cases life is seen as passive. And this alternative view says, what if life is active? Life plays a fundamental role in its own evolution into the future. And so I'm not going to digress into the Gaia hypothesis. And there are other hypotheses like the endosymbiosis hypothesis that also fit on this right-hand side. And most of these thinkers have encountered great resistance to their views, but they're gradually becoming more and more accepted. It's interesting to hear Kirshner, and one would assume if he's founder chair of systems biology at Harvard that he wouldn't be having problems with facilitated variation, but enormous resistance to this new theory. So an interesting observation, I want to suggest two observations by the great observer Stephen Jay Gould. First, he said, Darwin lived to see his name appropriated for an extreme view that he never held. For Darwinism has often been defined, both in his day and in our own, as the belief that virtually all evolutionary change is the product of natural selection. So if Darwinism is a misrepresentation of Darwin, then in this coming year, it would make sense to consider where Darwin might have really been headed and why the particular overlay that we put on it occurred. And a second comment that Gould made was he suggested that Darwin's theory of evolution might be viewed as an extended analogy to Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. Now, if that were true, that suggests a reversal of our common view that science comes first and develops its theories, and then afterwards the social scientists tag along and try to translate those theories. If, in fact, the wealth of nations and the whole idea of economic survival of the fittest was in the air when Darwin was formulating his theory, then that might explain why the particular interpretation that we are now stuck with occurred. And we're in a different time now, right? We're in a time when maybe Darwinism is not representing Darwin, and evolution, his real theory, needs to be reconsidered, when we need to maybe move beyond this military metaphor of the target of selection and the battle, the struggle for survival of the fittest. And I'm not saying reject that, but I'm saying that there needs to be a complementary, collaborative model. We need to be able to take the next step in a logical argument. So if competition for survival of the fittest is how evolution enabled life to advance toward better adaptation to its ecosystem, and if competition for survival of the fittest leads to the tragedy of the commons, destroying our shared ecosystem, then are we becoming ever better adapted to an ecosystem that we are destroying through our process of adaptation? And if so, we should think about this. The grand challenge is, I think, to create a human-computer collaboratory as an innovation network toward global sustainability. Now, I've hit my 40-minute limit here, and I'm not going to talk in detail about the tragedy of the commons, a great idea of Garrett Hardin, really his life work proposed in 1968, and it was less acute then than it is now. But the basic idea we all know is that if each fisherman fishes more and more effectively, gets larger and larger fleets and better equipment until their survival of the fittest motive fishes out the ocean, so there's no fish for anyone, then everybody loses. And so there are a series of arguments in the evolutionary theory domain that I think offer a way to look at the tragedy of the commons and to look at the constructive role that we can play. And the folks working on bioeconomics have a lot to offer to this debate. I'm going to be giving a talk focusing on this idea at Stanford, and I would love to have input from, I'm sure many of you have been thinking about this, so I would love to hear about this from you. But I am going to conclude because I would like to have some time for discussion. So thank you.